we're up and running. So I keep working on your essays and your readings in the book. Today we're talking about the First Amendment. So we've covered the different parts of the Constitution. But now the amendments that kind of govern how we operate today. Kind of clarified some things and expanded some rights, and particularly how some of these rights were interpreted. Speaking of freedom of speech, the election is coming up, and this is what we've got here. Early voting starting across the country. You can see from this map here, the dark red ones, just for purposes of illustration. This is where early voting is starting between September 16th and September 30th, these different states. Early voting will start between now and run in through the election. In some cases for up to 6 weeks. Changes. North Carolina is now an early voting state like that, but South Dakota, Minnesota, Virginia, Vermont. Now, there are a couple little exceptions here, some of these. When you vote early in Arkansas, it's not necessarily early voting, it's what we call absentee voting. But they basically allow any excuse for absentee voting while you're not voting on election day. Counts just perfectly valid as anything else. Again, there are some exceptions here. Like, for example, here in Missouri, state law does not, permits no excuse absentee ballots 2 weeks prior to election day. Even in Michigan, early in-person absentee starts September 26th. Early in-person voting starts October 26th. Main difference between voting by mail and voting by person. Mississippi, only voters who meet specific requirements are allowed to vote absentee. Certain very specific things. You can vote fairly early in Mississippi, but got to meet certain guidelines for that. Say in other states here, beginning of first half of October. So the bigger states: California, Arizona, New Mexico, Georgia, Ohio, Indiana, Maine. States that may be a very important part of the election. Between first half, early voting starts between October 1st and 16th. In the other states, early voting second half of October. In Arkansas, early voting is 2 weeks before election day. And yes, you can vote on Saturday in Arkansas as well. Now, in Arkansas, early voting, a lot of times that's at the county courthouse. Sometimes it's at City Hall, at the county seat. Sometimes at a school, or in our case here in Union County, it's at the municipal auditorium. Big space, lots of room, a lot of people moving in and out. That's early voting, how it looks like. That's a map from electoralvote.com. And early voting of some type is available in every state. And they've done some interesting studies on this, that now more than half of all voters vote early. So essentially, early voting is won, the election is won during early voting. Still have a lot of events going on before the official election day, for the deadline. For example, October 1st, you have the vice presidential debate. Democratic candidate Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, and J.D. Vance, Republican senator from Ohio. And of course, they always have classically what they call the October surprise, some late-breaking event that kind of misses the election somehow. You can never tell what it's going to be, but it's always going to be something. They always call it the October surprise. But anyways, this is early voting in the different states we've got so far. It's from electoralvote.com that put this together. A little more detail. Vote by mail. What's it look like? Well, in Arkansas, you can vote by mail, but you need certain excuses, like you're out of the state or out of the country during that time, or you might, or you have some kind of physical infirmity. You can't physically go to the polls, something like that. Um, it's different. Like I said the laws are different with different states, but Arkansas, it's basically one of those. And you have to contact the county clerk's office in Arkansas if you are going to, if you need an absentee ballot, mail-in ballot.
Why is an excuse needed in the state? All the states are different.
Yeah, laws, all the states are all different. So it just depends on kind of the mix of legislators you get together. Some say, well, I'll vote for it, but you got to put this excuse in. Some say, well, I want that excuse. It just gets mixed all sorts of different ways. These laws will change from time to time. So in the early 1990s, early voting was just starting in a couple of states, but then it's gradually expanded across the entire country. I think Michigan was one of the last states to allow early voting. So, excuse needed in these states. Vote by mail, no excuse needed in all these green states like Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, Arizona, New Mexico, Alaska.
I think in a middle line where if like southern people are
Yeah, it does kind of break down. It should break down according to
like politics,
a lot of cases. It does come down to politics
they don't
because
know
some of these states here, these are very heavily Republican states here, and Democrats tend to vote early, while Republicans tend to vote on election day. Um, Here it's kind of a grab bag, but a state like Alaska, um, where the partisan breakdown doesn't quite match the rest of the country, they have some. It tends to vote very strongly Republican presidential elections, but they can elect Democrats at local levels and for governor every so often. Um, a state like Alaska, where you don't have a lot of roads connecting areas, where a lot of towns are only reached by airport, vote by mail and non-excuse is it's really kind of an important thing. And in 8 states, it's all vote by mail. Particularly Washington, Oregon, basically they mail you a ballot, and you mail that back in. You can mail it back in, or you drop it off at your county clerk's office, or a certain size designated by your local voter board. California does it, Nevada does it, Hawaii does it, really a lot of the western states. And here it's not necessarily anything political. Utah is bright red Republican, and they mail out their ballots to everybody. It depends on kind of what they find most convenient. But then you got a case of a mayor in Wisconsin today. He was elected mayor of this little town on a platform saying that he was opposed to these drop-off boxes for mail-in ballots. He was opposed to it, even though it was state law. And as mayor, he cannot change state law. Because law in Wisconsin, and as of any other state, local election laws are governed by the state. So he decided he didn't want this drop-off sign in front of the city hall, so he picks it up and moves it. Yeah, it's a violation of state law. He's going to be in a lot of trouble for that. But he's not the only mayor, mayor of Wausau, Wisconsin, who's in legal trouble today. Apparently, the mayor of New York City has been indicted for bribery. Yeah, he's not having a good day. But no excuse postal voting. Because again, your vote, that is your voice. It's an important part of this process. Just in 2020. And same day voter registration. Now, in a lot of states like Arkansas, you have to register by a specific date. But in some states, you can vote, you can register to vote same day. There's basically walk up to the polling site, say, I'd like to vote. If you're not registered, they will register you at that point. And here's North Dakota, only the last few years, even required voter registration at all. But the bright red states here, 22 states of the District of Columbia have some kind of a same-day voter registration. And scattered across the West, the Midwest, and portions of New England. So they can keep track, so they know what your address is, basically declaring that yes, you're a real person, what your address is, and they make sure you don't vote multiple times, multiple locations. That's why they enacted voter registration.
But there wasn't one.
Same day voter registration.
Oh, okay.
Can you register to vote the same day of the election? In these states, you can. These big red states here. Washington, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, California, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, New Hampshire, Maine. Again, because today with computerized voter and centralized voter registration systems, it's easy to check this real fast. They can put you in the system really quickly and give you a ballot, and you're set to go. It just takes a few extra minutes. Now, in New Mexico, North Carolina, it's only during, they have usual laws there. Same day voter registration, but only during early voting. On election day itself, no. But only during early voting. It's obviously kind of a compromise went in there. Thinking is probably because so many people are voting on election day that it would just put it hard to keep up with. But in states like Arkansas, though, if you have, if there's some kind of dispute over your voter registration, you can cast what they call an absentee, a provisional ballot. It's basically you're voting, and they check your voter registration status later. It's called a provisional ballot. So, if you are legal to vote, then in Arkansas, you don't have to. They can't make you leave a voting site unless you voted first. Unless, of course, you're disrupting the place. In which case, yeah, they can kick you out. That same day voter registration. That site here, usvotefoundation.org, is designed to help people register and find their voter locations. This is where they have different states and their voter registration procedures here. Arkansas, early voting started October 21st this year. Louisiana, go from October 18th through October 29th. In Arkansas, early voting goes through the day before the election. So where does it all stand? Well, kind of where it always was. Last few weeks, it's race has stayed kind of stable. Um, Harris has a small lead at the national polls, but of course it comes down to the Electoral College, and it's stayed pretty close. All the states within a few points of each other. Harris has the advantage in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Really close in North Carolina. Some states showing Harris ahead, some polls showing Harris ahead, some showing Trump ahead. But Harris is down only by a couple in Georgia, Florida, and Arizona. And that's one of those cases where get out the vote, polling errors can make all the difference. Iowa's surprisingly close. We only have just a couple polls out of Iowa. Race for the Senate, tied. And it's interesting because you have two elections run in Nebraska this year for U.S. Senate. One is for an unexpired term. Their U.S. Senator had resigned and took a job in Florida as a president of college, and that's one of those elections to fill the remainder of that term. The other one is to fill the regular 6-year term. And in that race, in Nebraska, you have an independent candidate running who's ahead of the Republican. Nebraska has not elected a Democrat to the Senate since 2006. Texas, it's going back and forth, but polling basically is a margin of error. A couple of polls have showed the Democrat Colin Allred ahead. He's a congressman. The incumbent senator Ted Cruz, he's had most of his lead's been narrowing steadily. Texas has not elected a Democrat to the U.S. Senate since 1994. Florida, very close race as well. Montana, you have a Democratic incumbent. It's been a close race, but it's kind of stalled out a little bit. So these tiny little races here, like Montana, Nebraska, Texas, that could decide the U.S. Senate. House, they're just simply 435 races. It's hard to pull all of them together. But they have what I call a generic ballot. Basically, all things being equal, if you vote for the Democrat or the Republican for U.S. House, and the generic ballot, the Democrats have been up by a couple of points. But that generally doesn't. That's generally just generic ballot. Okay. So back to the First Amendment. We covered the Constitution. Remember the amendment process. 2/3 of both houses have to agree. Both houses of Congress. Then 3/4 of the states. Now, the Constitution was ratified. James Madison, considered the father of the Constitution, he basically gave us the three-branch structure and the general outline of the two-house Congress. Was pretty satisfied with the document. He felt like a Bill of Rights wasn't necessary because, in Madison's words, the Constitution is a Bill of Rights. He felt by spelling out his Congress's specific duties and specific limitations would be enough. But a lot of people in the country weren't quite satisfied. They're asking for a Bill of Rights to be included. Certain rights of people spelled out and guaranteed. Well, in Madison's words about the Constitution, he believed that, as he said it, every word of the Constitution decides a question between power and liberty. Decides a question between power and liberty. Basically, how much power is the government going to have versus how much freedom is the people going to have? How to maintain that balance that preserves order but protects the freedom of the people. They felt it was enough, but a lot of people still were hesitant about it. Constitution is ratified in 1788, and the first Congress convenes in 1789. James Madison now is a congressman. Already had a very impressive career. Came from Virginia. They say he was a later Secretary of State, later President himself, but most kind of known for being the father of the Constitution. So he proposes, one of his first acts in Congress was to propose a Bill of Rights, a series of amendments to the Constitution, as a conciliatory gesture. And a lot of these are based on what Virginia already had in its Constitution, the Virginia Bill of Rights. So you have 12 proposed in 1789, and 10 are ratified by 1791. Pretty quick turnaround process as far as the constitutions go, especially big package of 10 of them. But the First Amendment about freedom of speech, religion of conscience. As it says here in your book, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So there are 5 major freedoms listed here. 1. Freedom of speech. 2. Freedom of religion. 3. Freedom of assembly. 4. Freedom of the press. 5. Freedom of petition. Now, although it says Congress shall make no law, the Supreme Court has ruled that yes, the Bill of Rights, especially the First Amendment, is binding on all the states. Freedom of speech. Freedom to say what you want. Now, understand there are certain limitations on these freedoms. None of these is absolute. There have been a lot of Supreme Court cases about just where you'll draw the line of some of these things. Freedom of speech, but you don't have the right to threaten someone or make terroristic threats against someone. You don't have the right to libel someone, that is, to lie about somebody's reputation in public. It is. And we'll get to that just line in just a few minutes. But understand, freedom of speech does not mean you're free from the consequences of what you say. You can have pretty much any opinion you want, but if you say something that's extremely unpopular, like say, I think all books should be banned and no one should ever be allowed to read anything again, don't be surprised if people don't like you very much anymore. Don't be surprised if you're a politician say that and no one's voting for you. That's not censorship. That is people vote. That is people expressing their opinions about your opinion. If you're own a business and say, well, I think the president should be impeached, no matter what it is, don't be surprised your business goes under. That's not censorship. That is consequences of your freedom of your speech. Now, censorship it's the government saying, you can't read this book, or the government saying, this is banned, or this is illegal. Not people saying, I'm not going to associate with you, I'm not going to do business with you because of your political opinions. That's different. Now, should you boycott someone based on their political opinions? I don't know, that's up to you. It's your money, shop where you want. But understand that while you have the freedom to say what's on your mind, to speak your opinion, with freedom comes a responsibility. Yeah. Now, does this mean, now, when it comes to obscenities, freedom of speech, that's kind of a gray area. So there have been a lot of Supreme Court cases on that. There used to be public censorship boards basically deciding what is obscenity. That's why they call it revenge porn. That you're in a relationship with someone, you took some rather intimate pictures of them, and you get in an argument, you break up. Do you have the right to post those on the internet for all to see? No, you don't. That's not freedom of speech. Or something disgusting involving little kids. Is that protected freedom of speech? No, that is a crime. That is not protected freedom of speech. I give $50 to a senator to vote a certain way. Is that bribery or is that freedom of speech? Well, that's still kind of a gray area. Kind of the problem you have when the people affected by those laws make those same laws. That's for a discussion for another day. But freedom of speech. But it gives you the power to say what's on your mind, but also I'd say, well, I like what the government's doing, but also I'd say I don't like what the government's doing. It means I can go down to city council meeting. If I follow the rules, I can go up and say to the city council, I hate the job you're doing. You can walk up to your state legislator and say, I think you're the sorriest, dumbest son of a I've ever met. You can do that. That's your right. You can post on Facebook or the newspaper, I think the president's the worst human being ever walked the face of the planet. That is your God-given right and our favorite American pastime. Complain about the president, no matter who it is. That's freedom of speech. And like we're doing with our Human Rights Project, simple little things like that, like making a comment or a joke on Twitter or Facebook. We do that all the time. That's our right. But in some countries, you don't have that right. You get arrested for that. That's what freedom of speech is. Police aren't going to barge into your home and drag you off and you disappear because you said something about somebody with somebody powerful in government. We have freedom of speech. We don't have to worry about that here. But we're not immune from the consequences of what we say. Great power comes great responsibility, which is First Amendment, freedom of speech. And we're going to dive into some of the specifics here in a minute. Freedom of religion. You believe what you want to believe. One God, no God, many gods, your decision. And you, whatever deity you believe in, or deities. You don't have to answer to anyone for what church you go to, what church you don't go to, what day of the week you go to church, whether you sleep in on Sundays, that's up to you. There is no official church in this country. There is no approved church, so you don't have to worry about, like in some countries, the police busting down your door and arresting you for worshiping the wrong God or shutting down your church. Everyone going off to some gulag somewhere. It's freedom of religion. Right to believe, right to live pretty much any way you want. As long as you're not hurting anyone else. You can say and believe and think and do pretty much whatever you want. As long as you don't hurt anybody else. Now, does freedom of religion mean because you believe a certain way, you get to make everyone else believe the way you want to by force of law? No. But does that mean you can tell your legislator you want certain laws passed based on religion? You can ask, but is it constitutional? Not necessarily. That's where we get into that kind of nebulous gray area of the First Amendment. But overall, and this is in the Constitution, in the First Amendment here, is separation of church and state. Jefferson called it a wall of separation. Now, these words are not in here, but lawyers and scholars use a lot of shorthand to kind of describe a complicated concept. For example, here, first part: Congress will make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Two clauses: the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. Means in terms of religion, the government is neutral and has to remain neutral on religious questions. Do they necessarily? What do you tell me? And that goes back to freedom of speech. But the idea, though, is we do not have a national religion in this country. We do not have a national church. Because James Madison actually pointed this out in some of his early writings, was the importance of the government staying neutral. And he gave out examples of countries around the world at that time in 1791 when he wrote this. How when the government established a state religion, the religious minority was always persecuted. Whenever someone tried to establish Catholic rule over Protestants, the Protestants were always persecuted. Or just the opposite. An official Protestant church, the Catholics were always persecuted. It would always end up leading to uprisings, upheaval, violence, even civil war. A lot of people's families had left Europe in the 1600s and 1700s because of civil wars in Europe over religion. And Madison saying that must not happen in this country. Made another point that whenever church and state are united, it always ends up degrading the other one. Government always corrupts the church. Church always corrupts the state when they're together. The two don't mix together because politicians, they're interested in popularity and power. They will twist the church around to suit their ends. Yep, and vice versa, exactly. So that's why Madison's very careful to include that in here. There shall be no national church. Now, the overwhelming majority of people in the United States in 1790 are Protestants. But there's a significant number of people who were Catholics, Jews, people who didn't observe anything. Some states at this time still required that you give 10% of your earnings to the state church. There were churches established at the state level, official church, state churches, but not a national church. But by the 1820s and 30s, those churches, that policy had been ended. Even some state laws say you had to tithe, give 10% of your earnings to any religious organization. Madison said that would be a violation of freedom of religion, separation of church and state. Because you have to think, religion has changed a lot in this country. What is the largest denomination in the United States today? Roman Catholic.
Really?
Roman Catholic Christians. Yeah, of Christians.
That is still Christian.
It's the largest Christian faith in the world. It's also the largest denomination in the United States. Second largest is Baptist and all the different kinds of Baptists all put together. Third largest, Methodist and all the different Methodists put together. But fastest growing religion in the United States as of 2020, unaffiliated. People don't believe in anything. Yeah, they don't believe in any religion, no.
That's not a church.
No. But it is a religious affiliation, not affiliation. Yeah. What happens when you're in a country where all of a sudden nobody believes in anything? Because I understand religious opinions change. Most people, particularly in the middle states and the southern states, were in 1790 Episcopalian, as I call a very high church, a very formal kind of church. Now the more freewheeling faiths like Baptist or Church of Christ or something like that. Aren't very many Baptists in the United States in 1790. Church of Christ didn't exist yet. But some of these churches, the way they practice, like say snake handlers in West Virginia, that would not have sat well with the founding fathers. They would consider that kind of display to be obscene or blasphemous. Yeah. But previous religion says, you know what? You can believe that if you want to. You don't need anyone's permission. I'll put it to you another way. What was the largest denomination in Arkansas in the year 2000? Baptist. In 1900. Methodist. Yeah, kind of Protestant, but yes, Methodist. Biggest in the state in 1900. In 1800. Roman Catholic. 1700. No Christians in here around. Whatever the Qualpaws believed. Religion changes over time because people respond to different religions because they have different needs, different times, they have different beliefs, reflection of the culture, learning, and what they need. And so that changes over time, and Madison understood that what may be fashionable in one period may not be necessarily fashionable in the next. Fashionable might not be the wrong word here, but religions do change, beliefs do change. And the people have the right to grow and change as their beliefs need. It's something that can't be dictated to them by the state. So the Establishment Clause, no national church, also the Free Exercise Clause. Congress cannot interfere in your religious practices. Yeah, because if you're not hurting anyone, it's not anyone's business. But that said, though, you can't say, well, my religion says I can commit acts of fraud all over the country. I cannot, my religion says I get to rob this bank. No. There are limitations on that too. Okay. Next, freedom of assembly. This is a reaction to the American Revolution when Massachusetts was placed under martial law just before the beginning of the Revolution. They said you cannot have large groups gathering in public without government permission. The person then says, oh yes, you can now. As long as it's peaceful assembly. If it's unpeaceful, yes, the police can come and break it up to maintain order. But peaceful assembly, that's perfectly acceptable. Now, suppose you're organizing a march for a certain political issue, a certain social cause, or a parade. Can you do that? Yes. But if you're going to be using a public street for it, you do need a permit so the police know which streets to close off during the duration of that parade or that demonstration. To make sure no one gets run over. And emergency vehicles know which way to turn around. Freedom of assembly. Freedom of the press. Right to print the news as you see fit. George Orwell once said, writing in 1984, that freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 = 4. Yeah, basically, you have the right to speak the truth, especially the truth as you see it. You have the right to say that the emperor has no clothes. You have the right to say that I think what the state is doing is wrong, or the city is doing is wrong, or this politician's a crook. That's what freedom of the press is. Thomas Jefferson said he considered that probably the most important of these freedoms. To have a free and active press, to people to be informed what is going on in their communities. And for a republic, a free government like ours to function, we have to be an informed electorate. Which means, yes, we have a responsibility to read the news, even the stories we think are boring, because we have to understand what's going on in our world, what's being done in our names. Freedom of the press. Got limitations of freedom of press? Yes, like freedom of speech and other things, but you have to understand something about freedom of the press is the press is not obligated only to print things you like. The press can write on any subject they want. But if they're writing something about someone and you don't like what they're saying, that doesn't mean what they're doing is illegal or should be taken away from. That's part of our system. If you don't like what a particular news outlet is saying, change the channel. Don't buy that newspaper. Close that web page. And their earnings will be reflected accordingly. But the press, again, this is a responsibility. They have the right to print the truth, print the facts, because people do have a right to know. Freedom of petition. You don't like something the government's doing, you can circulate a petition. Your friends and your neighbors asking the government to change it. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But you have the right to circulate that petition. Say, I'd like you to change this. That's your protected right under the First Amendment. In fact, with these different referenda we have on the ballot here in Arkansas in the election, that is part of the petition process. A lot of people went around the state, collected signatures asking for certain laws to be put on the ballot. So we want these laws, let's put it up to a vote. And that's part of the petition, our freedom petition. Because we, the people, have the right to put laws on the ballot in the state if it meets certain criteria. Freedom petition. So there's these 5 freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, assembly, freedom of press, freedom of petition. So in Virginia, freedom of religion, this one is a very important topic. Madison written on this extensively, as did Thomas Jefferson. We got here is the Virginia Act for Establishing Religious Freedom. This is passed by Thomas Jefferson. He's governor of Virginia back in 1786. Now, Jefferson was a deist, and that was a very common belief at that time. The idea that, yes, that God exists, that God and God created the world, but God does not take an active role in the affairs of the world. That God is like a clockmaker. Created the world, set it up, set it on the mantle, and just let it go on its own. But a lot of people didn't agree with Jefferson. He understood that, but he understood the importance of freedom of religion. And the Virginia Act for Establishing Religious Freedom considered that to be one of his proudest achievements. And he asked that 3 things be written on his gravestone when he died. 3 achievements of his life. Author of the Declaration of Independence, founder of the University of Virginia, and for this, Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. That's just a handful of things he actually did. Any one of those would have secured a nice place in history, but he did all of that. Anyways, as a philosophical statement here in the end on the back said, "Be it therefore enacted by the General Assembly that no man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, place, or ministry whatsoever, nor shall be enforced, restrained, molested, or burdened in his body or goods, nor shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious opinions or belief, but that all men shall be free to profess, and by argument to maintain, their opinions in matters of religion, and the same shall in no wise diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil capacities." Religious tests, freedom of religion. And that we well know this assembly, elected by the people for the ordinary purposes of legislation only, who have no powers equal to our own, and that therefore to declare this act irrevocable will be of no effect in law. Yet we are free to declare, and do declare, the rights hereby asserted are the natural rights of mankind, and that if any act shall be hereafter passed to repeal the present or to narrow its operation, such an act will be an infringement of natural right. It's the idea that certain rights exist naturally independently of government, particularly the right to believe what you want. Actually, it had a powerful impact along Virginia and later the development of the First Amendment. But all that said, back to the First Amendment here. Now, like I said, a lot of Supreme Court cases have been decided on this. The American Library Association, ALA.org here has a website, and of course they're particularly strong defenders of the First Amendment because that is their business. Libraries are in the business of free speech and free ideas. They have a list here of notable First Amendment cases. We'll go over a few of them here. One of them is the case Shank versus United States, 1919. It's called the clear and present danger test. That is, what is a limitation on what you can say? It is, you cannot use speech to incite violence, incite a riot. And Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said in this case here, I cannot falsely shout fire in public in a theater. That's where we get that from. It is, First Amendment does not say you can shout fire in a theater when there isn't one. But it does say you can have a discussion about fire safety. You can say there's a fire in a theater when there really is one, but you can't lie about it. And so speech that may be alarming or seem threatening, you cannot do that. You have to say something alarming. It has to be what's called the clear and present danger test. Clear and present danger. I scream fire, there has to be one. That is the clear and present danger. There is actually a fire going on. Or scream, a guy has a gun. Clear and present danger. Yes, the man has a gun. He's pulled out a gun. Something like that. It says here is a question of proximity and degree. The Supreme Court affirmed the convictions of the defendants in this case for conspiring to violate certain federal statutes by attempting to incite subordination in the armed forces and interfere with the recruitment and enlistment. During wartime, defendants mailed to new recruits and enlisted men leaflets that compared military conscription to involuntary servitude and urged them to assert their constitutional rights. Now, it's one thing to say, I think the draft is unconstitutional. Or even say, I think the draft is like slavery. But you don't have the right to say, soldiers here are drafted, desert the army. Because that is creating a riot-like condition. That is incitement. So that's why they were convicted. Say, I think the draft is wrong. That's one thing to say, abandon the army, desert, is telling people to commit a crime that is desertion or go AWOL. That is a crime. And falsely shouting fire in a theater. Clear and present danger test. So, just one here. I say, as I expand on a bit further, the Brandenburg v. Ohio case, 1969, the Supreme Court established the modern version of the clear and present danger test, holding that states only could restrict speech that is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. This particularly say that some people in some little town are rising up against the government, or some group is committing crimes against animals. That is inciting a riot. That is potentially inciting a terrorist act. Say that this group of people are about to commit a violent act, so we need to get them first. Clear and present danger.
I have an example.
Yeah, this case comes from the Vietnam War.
Trump saying that Asians are eating dogs, would that
Yeah, because
count?
Vance and Trump recently got in a lot of trouble because they said Haitian immigrants in the small town in Ohio are stealing people's pets and eating them, which is an absolute lie.
Is that
That is potentially a crime. Because what's happened since then is all sorts of threats have been sent to that city. Bomb threats have been sent to the local schools. White supremacists are marching down the streets of that city. And Haitian immigrants have been receiving a lot of threats because of that. Because they lied. And so it was made up, it was always made up, it was always a lie, but they said it anyway, just try to get people's attention. That could be, yes, that could be a crime under Ohio law. If you or I were to say that and spread around that, we would certainly be in prison by now. Now, J.D. Vance said he had his constituents there in Ohio calling him, telling him they saw this personally. Say, that doesn't make sense. People personally saw these people kidnapping pets and eating them in front of them. That doesn't make sense. That was a lie. In the First Amendment, you get to call a lie a lie. Several decisions here on the right to read freely. The certain local and state governments try to ban certain books. The Supreme Court overturned those attempts every time. Freedom of expression in schools. Now, we all went to school. We always had that one person saying, that's violating my rights. I have the right to do this. I have the right to do that. Well, did they? Exactly. Every school had at least one.
And the people that say that too, they don't even know their rights.
Yeah.
Majority of the time. And then they get.
Basically, some people just want an excuse to try to make some trouble and stir up things. Now, in some cases, there are rare cases people like that are right, but in a lot of cases they're wrong. That's why you have to know the law, know your rights, and know how they apply. For example, Tinker versus Des Moines ISD, 1969. Number of students were expelled who wore black armbands to school in some protests of the Vietnam War. That's all they're doing, just wearing an armband in protest of the Vietnam War. Now, traditionally, black armband was a symbol of mourning. But they weren't doing anything else, just the black armbands were expelled for it. Well, the Supreme Court held that students do not shed their First Amendment rights at schoolhouse gates. First Amendment protects public school students' rights to express political and social views. That is, as long as it's done peacefully and not in a disruptive manner. For example, you have the right to express your opinion in class so long as it does not disrupt it. If I'm trying to say something and you keep shouting at me, I can ask you to leave. That's not a violation of rights. That is enforcing the code of conduct, which is I get the floor and I decide who gets to talk. This room is not necessarily a democracy. That there has to be order in this classroom. Or you don't agree with someone else's speech, you don't get to shout at them, make threats to them, or threaten to beat them up. You can't do that. But also, if you're to wear a political t-shirt to class, or a political button, that is your right. Whether I agree with that particular candidate or not, that is your right. So that's what we're saying here in the Tinker versus Des Moines case, is that what they were doing was peaceful. They weren't making any statements in class, just simply wearing an armband and going about their business. That by itself would be protected speech. In the case of Zykan versus Warsaw Community Schools, Warsaw Board of Trustees is 1980. The student brought suit seeking to reverse school officials' decision to limit and prohibit the use of certain textbooks, to remove a certain book from the school library, delete certain courses from the curriculum. Basically, some people objected to the content of some courses and some books, so they tried to have it removed from the schools. Kid and his parents take it to court. The first level courts dismissed the suit. They rejected it. So they appealed. The Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit Federal ruled that the school board has the right to establish a curriculum on the basis of its own discretion, but it is forbidden to impose a pall of orthodoxy. As the right of students to file complaints was recognized, the court held that students' claims must cross a relatively high threshold before entering upon the field of a constitutional claim suitable for court litigation. It is, yes, he had the right to sue over that, is what they're saying. That did the student, that the district have the right to adjust its curriculum? Yes. But the student also has the right to sue over that. Kind of a mixed decision. It has a lot of these. Another one here. Mozart versus Hawkins County Board of Education, 1987. Parents and students brought this act challenging the mandatory use of certain textbooks on the grounds that the textbooks promoted ideas that were offensive to the religious beliefs. The U.S. Court of Appeal for the Sixth Circuit rejected the plaintiff's claim, finding the Constitution does not require student school curricula to be revised substantially in order to accommodate religious beliefs. That is, you don't have the right to impose your religious beliefs on everyone else. You have the right to exercise your religious beliefs in school. You do. But you don't have the right to impose those beliefs on others. Human rights of minors, protected free press. This is the big one here. The Pentagon Papers case, New York Times versus U.S., 1971. This is what happens. The New York Times got a hold of a secret Department of Defense document on the history of the Vietnam War. And what this basically it's fell into their hands, and part of it, what was so controversial about it was the conclusion was from the 1960s, the federal government, the Department of Defense, the government knew that the war in Vietnam was not winnable. They'd not be able to overpower and destroy the Viet Cong. This is when the Vietnam War is still going on. So these documents, called the Pentagon Papers, the New York Times is wanting to run these, but the U.S. government tried to pose an injunction to stop it from being published. Well, they take the case all the way up to the Supreme Court. In the middle of all this, the Washington Post also got a hold of the Pentagon Papers. They both want to run them. Applying the doctrine of prior restraint from the case Neer versus Minnesota, the court found that the claims that publication of documents would interfere with foreign policy and prolong the war were too speculative. That's what the government brought the case on, saying it could prolong the war, it could interfere with foreign policy. Well, we don't know that. Will that be enough to stop this statement from being made? From making a statement that a lot of people already agreed with, even foreseeing the Pentagon Papers? And so, because these are too speculative, it could not overcome the strong presumption against prior restraints. The Supreme Court said you cannot restrain the New York Times and Washington Post from printing the Pentagon Papers. So they were published, it caused an uproar, and the war went on for another 2 years. Simon Schuster versus New York State Crime Victims Board, 1991. The Supreme Court struck down New York's Son of Sam law. Son of Sam, he was a notorious serial killer from the 1960s and 70s. And what that law was that writings, someone can, New York State of New York passed a law saying criminals cannot profit off a crime they committed. So, among other things, this law also required book publishers to turn over to the state any proceeds from a book written by any person convicted of a crime related to or about that crime. They're saying they would, in the state of New York, they would take the proceeds of this and give this to the victims and their families. The Supreme Court said the law impermissibly singled out income only for the prisoner's expressive activity, and then only expressive activity relating to the crime, not necessarily compensating any victims of those crimes. The court agreed that many important books, such as the autobiography of Malcolm X or David Thoreau's Civil Disobedience, or even works by Martin Luther King, might not have been published if such a law were in place. That the law had to be applied evenly. That important works by people whose idea is considered to be criminal at the time, such as Martin Luther King saying that saying we should get rid of segregation and enact civil rights laws. Malcolm X and his ideas on civil rights, those might have been considered criminal in some areas. So the Simon & Schuster case here in 1991 says law has to be applied evenly. Right to dissent. A lot of this goes back to freedom of religion case. For example, this one, West Virginia versus Barnett, 1943. 1940, the state of West Virginia required every school child to participate daily in a salute to the flag of the United States. So the Pledge of Allegiance, whatever. And there are a couple kids there in West Virginia, the name of Barnett. They're Jehovah's Witnesses. And Jehovah's Witnesses said the Pledge of Allegiance is idolatry. It is treating with divine reverence an inanimate object, in their opinion of what idolatry was. Well, the kids were punished for not participating in it, and parents took the case all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said First Amendment barred any rule compelling individuals to salute the flag or participate in the Pledge of Allegiance. The Supreme Court affirmed the right to dissent. It's from the ruling here. But freedom to differ is not limited to things that do not matter much. That would be mere shadow freedom. The test of its substance is the right to differ as to things that touch the heart of the existing order. If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of public opinion, or for citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. If there are any circumstances which permit an exception, they do not now occur to us. So basically, you cannot be compelled to commit a particular action. That is, if you do not want to recite the Pledge of Allegiance in class for religious reasons or other reasons, you don't have to. In this case, it was for religious reasons. It was a religious freedom case. Now, it wasn't saying because these Jehovah's Witnesses do not agree with the idea of a Pledge of Allegiance, that doesn't mean it's taken away from everybody. Similarly, Woolley versus Maynard, 1977, Jehovah's Witness objected to Hampshire's state motto, "Live free or die," on his license plate. So because the state went on against his conscience, he did not believe the state had a right to force him to advertise something the state believes in, but he does not. The state discovered he had covered up the motto's license plate. The prosecutor basically gave him a ticket for it. But it wasn't the amount of the ticket, it was the principle in this case. The Supreme Court agreed with him, saying, "We begin with the proposition the right of freedom of thought protected by the First Amendment against state action includes both the right to speak freely and the right to refrain from speaking at all." In addition, the court said, the fact that most individuals agree with the thrust of New Hampshire's motto is not the test. It is not a question of popularity. Most Americans also find the flag salute acceptable. The First Amendment protects the right of individuals to hold a point of view different from the majority and to refuse to foster, in the way New Hampshire commands, An idea they may find morally objectionable. In this case, yeah, he could cover it up. But again, also remember something about a license plate, though. It is just basically a tax receipt saying you paid your taxes on this car. That's your license plate is. But the state likes putting mottos on it. Some states, like Pennsylvania, California, they put the web address on it.
You don't have to choose, like,
And a lot of states now, they have different kinds of license plates you can get.
with that not the case.
That wasn't the case in 1977, not in New Hampshire. The infamous flag burning case, Texas v. Johnson, 1989. This case, the Supreme Court held that burning the United States flag was a protected form of symbolic political speech, including there was no legitimate government interest in protecting the U.S. flag, or the sole act in question is destroying the flag in its symbolic capacity, especially when it's your flag. If it's someone else's flag, we'd have a problem. But if it's your flag you're burning in protest, the Supreme Court says that's okay. In fact, interestingly enough, the U.S. Flag Code says that if a flag gets old and tattered and it's falling apart on the flagpole, how do you dispose of it? You burn it. But in this case, it was a political act protesting the United States. And there were several cases, like we saw in the last discussion. Some people still trying to make that a crime, even the point of proposing constitutional amendments to make it a crime. But a bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment is that government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds the idea itself offensive or disagreeable. So me, I'm a patriot, I love my country, but you may have a different opinion. That's the First Amendment. I have my opinions, you have yours. Several cases involving that. Let's see here. There's one here. McIntyre versus Ohio Election Commission, 1995. Supreme Court struck down a state law banning distribution of anonymous campaign literature, emphasizing the long tradition of anonymous and pseudonymous political and literary speech, recognized the right to exercise First Amendment rights anonymously as an honorable tradition of advocacy and dissent. It's obscenity and decency. Generally, it's been upheld. Obscene. It is illegal to distribute obscene materials to minors or to portray minors in these materials. Libel. This is the big one. Now, understand, there's a difference between libel and slander. Libel is saying something false about someone, and it's printed. And you're saying that to destroy someone's reputation. That's a libel. Slander is when you speak it. Slander is spoken, libel is written, it's printed. And so this distinction gets important here, is whenever there is a libel, a case like this, lawyers prefer written because, or it's on video, it's printed, it's written down, because you can see the words, you can hear the words repeating over and over again. You can examine the words, you can examine the evidence. With slander, that's harder to do because it's said once, it's over, it disappears among the winds. But there are laws against either, but these are civil laws, civil suits. So go to this famous case here. New York Times versus Sullivan, 1964. It's probably the granddaddy of all the free press cases. What happened is New York Times printed a full-page ad paid for by a few civil rights activists who were critical of a few local officials in the South over Jim Crow laws. And the guy said, one of the guys said, they're lying about me, I'm suing them, and I'm suing the New York Times for this. Because in cases like this, especially civil cases, go for who's got the money. So, the Supreme Court in this case held that no public official may recover damages for defamatory falsehood relating to his official conduct unless he proves the statement was made with actual malice, that is, with knowledge that it was false with reckless disregard of whether it was false or not. The court stated the First and 14th Amendments require that critics of official conduct have the fair equivalent to the immunity protection given to a public official when it's sued for defamatory speech uttered in the course of his duties. Actually, I went even further here, the Gertz versus Robert Welch in 1974. The court applied the rule in the New York Times case to that person having special prominence in society by virtue of their fame or notoriety, even though they're not public officials. They must still prove actual malice when alleging libel. Gertz is a prominent lawyer who alleged that leaflet defamed him. Here. You got libel, written, slander, spoken. But the Times case here in 1964 says this. You have to meet two criteria. One, demonstrably false. And knowingly false. That is, it's false and you know it's false. Second, actual malice. You said this, the express intent of ruining someone's reputation. You said it because you knew it was false. You said it, and you said it to ruin their reputation. That is libel. That's the Times versus Sullivan standard. That's why whenever you're watching the news, you always see the same things. Some big scandal breaks out. Repeated attempts to reach him were unsuccessful, or such as he declined to comment, or said no comment. Or we tried to reach him repeatedly, but we could not reach him. That's where they're meeting the Times versus Sullivan standard. Actual malice. It is, we received this report. We tried repeatedly to get his version of events, but he declined to comment, or we couldn't reach him before press time, or such and such said, this is not true. So basically, they're saying, we're giving the other side a chance to respond to this. So therefore, it's not actual malice. So that's Times versus Sullivan. So, a whole lot of things to pack into the First Amendment. You can make a career out of First Amendment cases if it was a lawyer. A lot of people have. But we'll dive more into the Bill of Rights next time. So keep up with that. Get good readings. We'll see y'all later.